Imagine this: a vast horde of 150,000 Mongol warriors, conquerors of empires, sailing across the sea like a dark storm cloud, ready to swallow a tiny island nation whole. Against them, just 80 samurai, armed with nothing but their katanas, unbreakable spirit, and a desperate will to defend their homeland. In one fateful afternoon, these brave few turned the tide of history, destroying an unstoppable army in a blaze of glory. This is the epic tale of the Battle of Bun'ei, a story of impossible odds, heroic sacrifice, and divine intervention that still echoes through the ages. If you're hooked already and love diving into legendary battles, ancient warriors, and tales that make your heart race, hit that subscribe button right now. Turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. We've got more epic histories coming your way. And if you enjoy this, drop a like and comment below. Would you stand with those 80 samurai? Let's get into it. Our story begins in the year 1274, during the Kamakura period of Japan. The islands of the rising sun were a land of honor, tradition, and fierce warrior codes. Samurai lords ruled under the shogun, bound by Bushido, the way of the warrior, where death in battle was preferable to dishonor. But across the sea, a shadow loomed larger than any they had faced before: the Mongol Empire. Under the iron rule of Kublai Khan, grandson of the legendary Genghis Khan, the Mongols had forged the largest empire the world had ever seen. From the steppes of Asia to the walls of Europe, they crushed kingdoms with their hordes of horse archers, siege engines, and ruthless tactics. China had fallen, Korea submitted, and now Kublai set his sights on Japan, a mysterious archipelago rich in resources and ripe for conquest. He demanded tribute from the Japanese emperor, but the proud shogun, Hojo Tokimune, refused. "We bow to no foreign invader," he declared. War was inevitable. Kublai assembled a massive invasion fleet, over 900 ships carrying 150,000 warriors, Mongols, Chinese conscripts, and Korean allies. They were equipped with advanced weapons, poisoned arrows, explosive bombs made from gunpowder, and catapults that hurled fire and stone. Their cavalry could outmaneuver any foe on open ground, and their discipline was forged in countless victories. As the fleet set sail from Korea, the winds seemed to favor them, carrying whispers of doom toward the shores of Kyushu, Japan's southernmost island. Word of the approaching armada reached Japan like a thunderclap. Panic spread through the coastal villages. Fishermen reported sightings of endless sails on the horizon, blotting out the sky. The shogun mobilized his forces, but Japan's army was fragmented feudal lords with their own samurai retainers, totaling perhaps 10,000 men scattered across the island. They had no unified command, no massive navy to intercept the invaders. Instead, they relied on the natural defenses: rugged coastlines, narrow beaches, and the unpredictable sea. Among the defenders was a legendary figure, Kusano Jiro, a seasoned samurai from the Kusano clan. At 45 years old, Jiro had fought in border skirmishes and duels, his body scarred from blade and arrow. He was known for his unyielding loyalty and mastery of the sword. Under his command were 79 other samurai, a mix of veterans and young warriors eager to prove themselves. They weren't the elite of the shogunate. They were local defenders from Hakata Bay, the likely landing point for the Mongols, but fate had chosen them for greatness. As the Mongol fleet anchored off the coast on November 19th, 1274, the invaders wasted no time. Under the command of generals like Lu Fu Hong and Holden, they launched their assault. Waves of boats ferried troops ashore, their war drums thundering like the heartbeat of a giant beast. The Mongols formed up in tight phalanxes, shields interlocked, bows at the ready. Their first volleys of arrows darkened the sky, felling Japanese scouts who dared approach. The initial clashes were brutal. Japanese samurai, charging on horseback with naginata spears and yumi bows, found themselves outmatched. The Mongols used group tactics, firing in unison, then retreating to let fresh ranks advance. Explosive grenades scattered the Japanese lines, causing chaos and fear. "What sorcery is this?" cried one samurai as a bomb exploded nearby, shredding armor and flesh. By midday, the Mongols had secured a beachhead and pushed inland toward Hakata. Their numbers seemed endless, 150,000 strong, a sea of helmets and banners stretching to the horizon. Villages burned, civilians fled, and the Japanese defenses crumbled. The shogun's main force was still mobilizing miles away, leaving the coastal guardians to hold the line. It was here, at a narrow pass leading from the beach to the inland plains, that Kusano Jiro and his 80 samurai made their stand. The pass was a natural choke point, flanked by steep cliffs on one side and the crashing sea on the other, with jagged rocks and shallow streams making cavalry charges impossible. Jiro had scouted it days before, knowing it was the key to slowing the horde. "Brothers," he addressed his men as they fortified the position with makeshift barricades of felled trees and sharpened stakes. "Today, we are the shield of Japan. The enemy comes like a flood, but we will be the dam that breaks them. Fight not for glory, but for our families, our emperor, and our sacred land." The samurai nodded grimly. Among them was young Takeshi, barely 20, his hands trembling on his sword hilt. "Sensei, how can 80 stand against so many?" he whispered. Jiro placed a hand on his shoulder. "Numbers mean nothing when honor burns bright. Remember the tales of our ancestors. One true warrior can fell 100 foes." As the sun climbed high, casting a golden glow over the battlefield, the Mongol vanguard appeared. Thousands of infantry marching in formation, their armor clanking like distant thunder. Scouts reported the full horde behind them, 150,000 souls bent on conquest. The air grew thick with tension, the scent of salt and smoke mingling with the warriors' resolve. The battle was about to erupt. Little did the Mongols know, this afternoon would etch their defeat into legend. The Mongol horde advanced like a living wall of iron and fury. Thousands upon thousands, their banners snapping in the sea breeze, their war gongs pounding a relentless rhythm that shook the very earth. The air filled with the metallic tang of armor, the stink of horses, and the low chants of foreign tongues. At the head of this unstoppable tide marched disciplined infantry Chinese spearmen in tight ranks, Korean archers knocking poison-tipped arrows, and Mongol elites directing the chaos with sharp commands. Kusano Jiro stood atop a rocky outcrop overlooking the narrow pass, his katana drawn, the blade catching the afternoon sun like a flash of lightning. Behind him, his 79 brothers in arms formed a single line. No grand formations, no endless ranks. Just men, samurai, each one a storm in human form, clad in lacquered lamellar armor, faces hidden behind menacing mempo masks painted with snarling demons. Their yumi bows were strung, naginata poles planted like spears of defiance, and katanas hungered for blood. The Mongols reached the mouth of the pass. Scouts reported the bottleneck, cliffs rising sheer on the left, crashing waves on the right, the path barely wide enough for 10 men abreast. Perfect. Jiro raised his hand. "Hold," he commanded. "Let them come close. Let them taste our steel where their numbers mean nothing." The vanguard, perhaps 2,000 strong, poured in, shields raised, expecting easy slaughter. They laughed at the sight of so few defenders. "Look at these island dogs," one shouted in broken Korean. 80 against the Khan's might? Pathetic. But the samurai did not charge wildly as tradition might demand. Jiro had learned from scouts' reports of the earlier fights on Tsushima and Iki. The Mongols fought as one beast-massed arrows, explosive bombs, coordinated pushes. To meet them head-on was suicide. Instead, he had chosen the terrain as his ally. As the first Mongol ranks entered the choke point, Jiro roared, "Yumi!" A storm of arrows flew, not scattered, but aimed with deadly precision. Japanese longbows, drawn to the ear with incredible strength, sent shafts whistling through the air. Dozens of Mongols fell in the front line, arrows piercing eye slits, necks, and gaps in armor. Horses reared in panic, throwing riders into the press of men behind. The Mongols answered with their own volley. Short, powerful composite bows spat poison arrows in disciplined waves. Several samurai staggered, shafts protruding from shoulders and thighs. Young Takeshi cried out as one grazed his cheek, blood streaming. But none broke. They pulled the arrows free, bandaged wounds with torn cloth, and stood firm. "Forward!" Jiro bellowed. The 80 charged as one, not in a disordered rush, but in a controlled wedge. Leading were the veterans with naginata, sweeping in wide arcs that cleaved through spear shafts and limbs. Behind them, swordsmen closed the gaps, katanas flashing in brutal iaijutsu draws. The pass became a meat grinder. A Mongol sergeant lunged with a glaive, but Jiro parried with his blade, twisted, and countered with a single, perfect cut that severed the man's arm at the elbow. Blood sprayed. The sergeant screamed, but Jiro was already moving, his sword a blur as he felled two more in quick succession. Takeshi, fueled by terror and adrenaline, faced 3 Chinese conscripts. His first strike was clumsy, but his second found a throat. The third man raised a shield, too late. Takeshi's blade bit deep into the collarbone. "For Japan!" he shouted, voice cracking. The fighting was savage, close, personal. No room for cavalry charges or grand maneuvers. Here, it was blade against blade, man against man. The Mongols' explosives were useless in the tight confines. A thrown bomb would harm their own as much as the enemy. Their massed archery faltered as the lines compressed into chaos. Wave after wave crashed against the samurai line. Bodies piled up. Mongol, Chinese, Korean, and Japanese alike. The ground grew slick with blood, turning the narrow path into a crimson river. Samurai fell, one skewered by a spear, another crushed under a falling horse. But for everyone who dropped, 2 more stepped forward to take his place. They fought with the fury of men who knew this was their last stand. Hours passed under the merciless sun. The Mongols pushed, retreated under arrow fire, reformed, pushed again. Their commanders grew frustrated. "Break them!" one general roared from the rear. Fresh troops surged forward, perhaps 5,000 now committed to the pass. But the samurai held. In a moment of legend, Jiro spotted the Mongol banner bearer, a towering figure in ornate lamellar, waving the yak-tail standard high. "There!" Jiro pointed. "Cut the heart!" 3 samurai broke from the line in a suicidal dash. Jiro, Takeshi, and grizzled veteran Matsuda. Arrows flew around them. One grazed Matsuda's helmet, another pierced Takeshi's thigh, but they reached the bearer. Matsuda's naginata hooked the standard pole, yanking it down. The bearer turned, too slow. Jiro's katana flashed once, twice. The banner fell into the mud, trampled underfoot. A roar went up from the samurai. The Mongols hesitated, their cohesion cracked. Without the banner to rally around, confusion spread like wildfire. Then, as dusk began to creep over the battlefield, something extraordinary happened. The wind shifted. Dark clouds rolled in from the sea, faster than any storm should move. Thunder cracked like the gods awakening. Rain began, not gentle, but a deluge that turned the pass into a torrent. Visibility dropped to nothing. The Mongols, soaked and slipping, lost their footing on the blood-slick rocks. Jiro, drenched and bleeding from a dozen wounds, raised his sword to the sky. "The kami fight with us," he cried. "Push them back." The remaining samurai, perhaps 50 now, many wounded, surged forward one final time. The Mongols, demoralized by the storm, the losses, and the unbreakable wall of steel before them, began to fall back. First in ones and twos, then in ragged groups. Commanders shouted retreat orders. The horde pulled away from the pass, leaving behind mountains of dead. As night fell, the invaders retreated to their ships, battered and bewildered. They had expected conquest in hours. Instead, a handful of samurai had held them for an entire afternoon, inflicting casualties that stunned even the veterans of 1,000 battles. But the story wasn't over. The storm grew worse. Lightning illuminated the bay, where hundreds of Mongol vessels rocked violently. Waves crashed higher, winds howled like angry spirits. The divine wind, what the Japanese would later call kamikaze, had begun. The storm that had begun as a sudden downpour now raged with apocalyptic fury. Lightning split the sky in jagged white veins, illuminating the chaos below. Thunder rolled like the war drums of heaven itself. Rain lashed the battlefield in horizontal sheets, turning the blood-soaked pass into a slippery quagmire. The Mongol retreat, once orderly, dissolved into panic. Men slipped on rocks slick with gore and mud. Horses panicked and bolted, dragging riders into the surf. The narrow path that had been their undoing now became a trap. Bodies clogged the way, making escape a nightmare. Kusano Jiro, his armor dented and cracked, his left arm hanging useless from a deep spear wound, watched from the cliff's edge. His remaining warriors, no more than 40 now, many leaning on Naginata for support, stood silent amid the gale. They had held. Against impossible odds, they had held. But the battle wasn't finished. As darkness fully claimed the sky, broken only by flashes of lightning, Jiro turned to his men. "The enemy flees to their ships," he said, voice hoarse but steady. "They think the night will hide them, but the kami have not finished their work. We strike now, one last time. For every brother fallen, for every home threatened, we take vengeance." The samurai raised their weapons in a ragged cheer. Wounded though they were, the fire in their eyes burned brighter than ever. They moved like ghosts through the storm, following the retreating Mongols down to the beaches of Hakata Bay. What they found was pandemonium. The Mongol fleet, those hundreds of vessels still afloat, rocked violently at anchor. Waves, whipped to frenzy by the wind, smashed against hulls never designed for such open sea fury. Ships collided, masts snapped like twigs. Decks swarmed with terrified soldiers trying to secure lines or bail water. Many smaller boats, overloaded with wounded, capsized in the surf. Screams carried on the wind. Mongol curses, Korean prayers, Chinese wails, all drowned by the roar of the tempest. The samurai struck without mercy. Small groups waded into the shallows, katanas flashing in lightning bursts. They boarded grounded vessels, cutting down disoriented invaders before they could organize. Arrows flew from the beach. Not the disciplined Mongol volleys, but desperate shots from Japanese Yumi that found marks in the chaos. One by one, ships began to burn. Samurai hurling torches onto sails and decks soaked in spilled oil from broken lamps. Young Takeshi, limping from his thigh wound, led a daring raid on a large junk near the shore. With 3 companions, he climbed the swaying hull using grappling hooks fashioned from ropes and captured spears. They burst onto the deck, cutting through a knot of guards. Takeshi's blade found the throat of a Mongol officer waving a banner, another standard fallen. The ship tilted dangerously as waves hammered its side. "Back to the beach!" he shouted as the vessel began to break apart. Across the bay, similar scenes unfolded. Samurai used the storm as cover, launching hit-and-run attacks. They targeted command ships, killing officers and sowing confusion. The Mongols, masters of land warfare, were helpless at sea in this maelstrom. Their explosives fizzled in the rain, their bows warped and useless. As the night wore on, the typhoon reached its peak. Winds howled at hurricane force, waves towering like mountains. Ships dragged anchors, smashing into one another or onto jagged reefs. Hundreds foundered within sight of the shore. Men leapt overboard, only to be smashed against rocks or pulled under by the currents. The sea claimed far more lives than Japanese steel that night. By dawn, the storm began to abate. The sky lightened to a bruised gray. The beaches of Hakata were littered with wreckage, shattered timbers, torn sails, bloated bodies rolling in the surf. Mongol banners floated like discarded rags. Of the original fleet, perhaps a third remained intact enough to sail. The rest lay broken or sunk. The survivors, ragged, demoralized, scrambled aboard what ships could still float. Commanders, realizing the impossibility of regrouping, ordered full retreat. The armada that had come to conquer turned tail, limping back across the strait toward Korea. Behind them, They left perhaps 13,000 dead drowned, slain in battle, or executed on the shore by vengeful samurai patrols. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to the channel so you don't lose us and be the first to enjoy new fascinating stories every week.